Please welcome John Pasalis.
There we go. All right, well, thank you all for showing up and for having me. So today I'm going to be walking through the numbers behind multiplexes in Toronto. So basically what I'm doing is looking at everything in the city of Toronto that has been issued for a multiplex and basically connecting it with MLS data to get some more insight into what people are paying for properties that are being redeveloped into multiplexes, and what is going on with the rentals after these properties are being built. What are the multiplexes getting, and how these what differences there are across the GTA. So a little bit about kind of the motivation behind this. I mean, I posted this post on LinkedIn, I don't know, a few weeks ago, talking about how I'm looking at doing this research, and I got a ton of responses from people looking for this type of data. And I mean, there are a few reasons I'm looking at doing this type of analysis, and this is kind of very early stuff that I'm showing you. I mean, one obviously is from a personal perspective. If I'm looking at building, I'd like to know what is going on and what the market's doing and where there are perhaps opportunities that are being overlooked. The second is I own a real estate broker, so we have a ton of clients potentially looking at investing, looking at building, and I'm one of these people who needs to understand the full scope of the market rather than just kind of selling properties, to better understand and better advise them. But lastly, one place where I think there's a huge gap, and we're hearing it a lot from our own clients, and it kind of ties with something that Dan was saying earlier, this idea that a lot of people still want to own their own home. And a lot of the purpose-built multiplexes that have been built, of course, have been purpose-built rentals. But to what extent is there space for people to own them? And whether that is in a condo tenure and you're pre-selling them, or potentially even some type of co-ownership model. We get tons of people who reach out to us who can't afford a family-sized home in the city of Toronto and are actually trying to co-buy housing with people to try to make the numbers work. And obviously they're going to have slightly less space, but people just have a bias towards ownership. So is there a way over the next 3-4 years, we're not going to be building much family-sized housing for ownership, is there a way to fill that gap with multiplexes? And that's kind of one of the things that I've been thinking about. So a little bit about kind of this analysis. So what I'm looking at right now is basically all permits issued by the City of Toronto since 2023 to the third quarter of 2025. We're looking at properties that are at least 3 units or more. So I'm not looking at duplexes. I've seen some research from the City of Toronto where they included duplexes. I'm not really as interested in that. And every permit must create at least additional units. And what I mean by that is, the City of Toronto's building permit data, for anyone who's looked at it, is very messy data. It's not easy to work with. So what we're looking at is potentially someone has an existing triplex and they're adding 2 units, or they're adding 1 unit. Those are properties that we're looking at, with the exception of ADUs. So basically, we're not double counting permits. I'm not counting one permit for a 4-plex plus the permit for the ADU is 2 permits. We're trying to look at distinct properties, basically. So if someone's taking a triplex and converting it to a 5-plex, we want that, but we're not counting the ADU as a second permit because that's kind of one broader property. The only case where we're counting multiple permits for one address is in cases where it looks like, and it's clear the lot is being severed, so you might have actually 3 building permits for one address, but that is a case where they're actually building 3 multiplexes. So that is a little bit about how we're analyzing the data. And this is kind of the high level is basically, since 2023, we've seen 779 multiplex building permits issued in the City of Toronto. 27% of those have been for new houses, 73% for renovations. The City of Toronto, of course, separates them. Now, many of the renovations, of course, are probably new structures where they're just keeping, obviously, the external walls for zoning purposes and to not have to qualify under the current rules. But 27% new builds, 73% renovations. Now, I added this chart here because Matt had asked me about when we're looking at people who are building permits, what are the parking challenges or what are the parking constraints? And these polygons here are basically a map of the areas in the City of Toronto with on-street parking requirements. And typically these are areas where properties are going to may not have parking, or it's going to be a little bit harder to get parking. So most of these, of course, are in East York, Beaches, and the downtown core, pretty much right up to St. Clair and just north of St. Clair up to Eglinton. So all of these central areas are areas where parking is probably going to be a little bit more constrained than if you go a little bit further north of Eglinton or further west. So that's just something to keep in mind when we look at it. Now, when we look at where people are building, I mean, this map is broken out by MLS district, and this is effectively a count of the number of permits. In yellow, these are regions where 15 to 25 multiplex permits have been issued. In the blue, it's between 25 and 50, and red is 50 plus permits. I think the downtown core had over 100 actually. So these are, again, MLS districts, and we can kind of see most of them are kind of concentrated in the West End here, from sort of the downtown west of the young City of Toronto, all the way up, going right up to 401 basically, and even up to kind of the Downsview area. So this is where most of the permits have been issued. And if we actually kind of break it out even a little bit further, we see 76% of multiplexes, interestingly enough, are actually west of Yonge Street. Which to me was quite interesting. I think there are potentially some opportunities in the East End, but a lot of the concentration has been on the West End. I think part of this is certainly transit. I mean, if you are along that corridor that was sort of red and blue, you're basically along sort of the west end of the Yonge University line. So you have access to that, and of course access to the Eglinton if they ever complete the LRT. But it's certainly the subway line is a big factor. I think that's contributing to the West End statistics. So I'm just trying to keep on top of my time. So when we look at multiplexes and what people are paying for land, first thing to note is that out of the 700 plus permits we had, only 370 were actually properties that were purchased since 2021, which I thought was kind of interesting. So that's just under half. So if you look at all of the building permits, only roughly half of these properties were purchased in the past 4 years. 23% of those nearly 800 building permits had actually zero sales transactions, which means that people have owned the land probably more than 20 years. And they're basically redeveloping it. So about 23% had no sales transactions. Roughly half have been purchased over the past 4 years. And then the other 25% or so were bought sometime between 2005 and 2021. So when we looked at kind of average sale prices, we're generally looking over the past 4 years. Even this isn't perfect because obviously anyone who bought 2022 paid a lot more than someone who bought in 2023. But just to have a little bit of context and data, we thought we'd kind of look at some of these differences. So when we look at recently purchased properties, 75% of what has been bought over the past 4 years has been detached lots compared to semis at 16%. And then the balance, just other house types other than detached or semis. When we look at average prices, detached, interesting enough, semis are actually more expensive than detached, which, I mean, seems counterintuitive until you think about where people are buying. I mean, all the semis that are being purchased pretty much are in the downtown core, kind of close to this West End, just north of Bloor, just south of Bloor, sort of in central Toronto. Whereas everything that is, or most of what is detached is being bought sort of in the inner suburbs further north where you're buying detached lots for $700,000, $800,000, $900,000, $1 million. So it makes sense that a lot of the semis are slightly above. Now, when we look at the price per square foot of land, and here I zeroed in on what builders are paying for detached lots only on a price per square foot basis in terms of the land that they're buying. And of course, the downtown core is close to about $600. And you can kind of see prices drop pretty dramatically as we start moving further north, 450. And again, all of this is based on the actual lot area, not on necessarily just frontage and depth, because you can have irregular lots. We actually have the actual lot area for irregular lots. And we can kind of see as we move further north, as you get up to Downsview, lot prices drop significantly to about, $170 a square foot, and then East York close to, 300. So, and again, the big difference here is that in areas like, East York, you're probably getting, 30 by 100 lots for, in the $1 million-ish range. Whereas if you're up by Downsview, you're getting, 50 by 120 or something like that, probably for the same price, if not less. So that is kind of the key difference. And again, of course, obviously Scarborough, very similar to Downsview, but is that kind of that red kind of corridor where prices are to 300 to 450 a square foot for land, and then of course the downtown core is the most expensive. And the downtown core driven by, in many cases, people buying, I'd say in more affluent areas, like places like the Annex, where just land prices are at a premium, or in some cases just buying smaller lots at pretty high prices, whether it's 20 or 25 feet wide. Now, when we look at kind of the rents that have been achieved over the past little while for these, and as Dan mentioned as well, if anyone has questions, please shoot them out, because we don't have to wait to the end as we go over this. When we look at what has been rented, again, we connected basically all of the building permits that we have. We connected them sort of with MLS data to understand how many properties have actually been listed for lease on the MLS. And out of the 780, only about 164 actually had rental transactions or rental listings on the MLS system. I think part of that is because some of these are not built or haven't even started in some case. And a lot of times, not every owner wants to list their property for lease on the MLS. A ton just list them privately on private platforms. So we're not going to get the full sample of properties that have been rented. So we have about 164 right now. And of those, we have 400, just over 400 actual leased transactions. So these are leased units that we're kind of taking into account in sort of this analysis. So when we look at what has been leased by number of bedrooms, over half, I'd say, are 2-bedroom units. These are kind of studios on the left, 1 bedrooms, 2 bedrooms, and 3 bedrooms. So 2 bedrooms are dominating the multiplex space, followed by 3 bedrooms. And this makes, of course, a ton of sense. I mean, I think this is probably the segment that is the most underbuilt right now. I mean, when we look at what is being built and what is being completed in the condo space, they're disproportionately small units. And I think when we look at the gap in the rental market, it's definitely going to be in larger family-sized type rentals. So that is what most builders are building. And when we look at rents, again, I mean, this is just a very small example of average rents for a 2-bedroom apartment across the city. And in downtown, the average rent is about $3,300-ish for a 2-bedroom, $3,350. East York area, it's about $3,000, and as we move further north, it's closer to $2,700. But I think a lot of these statistics kind of hide a couple things. I mean, number one, so roughly a 10% difference with East York. And these are just a couple of areas that had quite a few 2-bedrooms. I didn't want to use samples that were too small. If you look at the areas that is 2,700 there, that area is pretty much sort of the Yorkdale area. That's north of Eglinton, kind of that pocket. So you're seeing, what looks like probably close to a 20% difference in the average price for a 2-bedroom when you're comparing downtown to that area. But on a price per square foot basis, it's probably actually closer to about 30% because those units tend to be larger than the downtown ones. So on a price per square foot basis, we're probably seeing about a 30% difference between downtown rents and some of these outer, I'd say inner suburban areas. Now, I mean, I kind of pulled together a few case studies that kind of highlight some of the differences, a couple of examples of what people build, what people pay for land, and what they actually got for rents, because I think it's noteworthy, and I think it shows some different examples of what people are doing, what people are building, and different rent rates across the city. So this first example is a detached home in the Annex, bought for $2.5 million, 30 by 128 lot, no parking, and it was a triplex that was converted to a 5+1. This one, I believe, was, technically a renovation. It wasn't a new build. I think they kept most of the structure, probably just expanded it and kept most of the walls. But converted it into this, a detached in the Annex. And, and this is a very good example of what is being built. All of these are pretty much 2-bedroom, 2-bathroom units. I think they had 1 3-bedroom, and the unit 7, the 4-bed and 3-bath, I believe, was the laneway suite in the back. So these are all kind of spacious units, $3,000 to $4,000 to $5,000 a month in rent. Obviously this is a premium location, so they paid quite a bit for the lot, but they're getting pretty decent rents. So in this example, the rents are about $350 a square foot. I'd say that is a little bit low for the downtown area. Probably downtown, if you have slightly smaller units that are in the $3,000 a month price range, are probably going to be closer to $4 a square foot. But these are bigger units and targeting a specific clientele. And of course, the bigger, more expensive you get, the lower you're going to be at a price per square foot basis. But even in the Annex, for large $4,000 to $5,000 a month apartments, are getting $350 a square foot for these units. This next example is a house, a bungalow bought in Mimico for $985, 2024, 40 by 150 lot, private drive. And it was, again, converted into a 4+1. And this project ended up leasing, again, most of these are 2- and 3-bedroom units in the mid 3,000s per month price point. Again, the coach house, I think, is the most expensive one, about $4,000. Total rent's about $18,000 a month. And average rent is about $3 a square foot for this one. So again, a fair bit less than what we would get in the downtown core. I believe the coach house was probably close to about $350 a square foot, but the rest of these were in the low threes. And again, in this example, and the last one I didn't mention, they advertised only one of the units as having parking in the Annex example. This one, I believe, just one unit as well had parking. Again, I think they're just effectively using the private driveway as a parking spot and as one single parking spot. So pretty much all of these units did not have parking. They would have to have basically parking on the street for these types of properties. And again, I think this is one area where I don't think it had on-street parking requirements, which obviously makes it a little bit easier to park on the street. And then this last example is near the Dufferin and Eglinton area. So that is, again, kind of a little bit further north. An example of a bungalow bought for $730,000 in 2023, 25 by 133 lot, front yard parking. Again, and this was converted into a 4+1 as well. Most of these rents, I think these were about 1,100 square feet. Pretty much all of them were rented for around $3,000 a month. The coach house, I don't think has been completed. I don't think it's been listed for rent. But on average, when we look at these properties, again, they're getting about $270 a square foot. And again, I think this kind of leads to what I was saying earlier, where we're seeing a probably closer to a 30% difference in the price per square foot of rents between downtown Toronto and some of these outskirts, inner kind of suburbs, I'll call them. Dufferin and Eglinton is not, a particularly fancy or affluent area. It's a little bit more affordable. It's why you're getting a detached bungalow for $700,000. So these are some of the difference that we're seeing in terms of rents across these areas. Now, a few key takeaways. I'll just summarize. Again, 3/4 of multiplexes are west of Yonge. I think that was an interesting trend. Scarborough, near Eglinton, and I highlight near Eglinton because I think that's obviously going to be the one transit area, is overlooked right now. I think there's probably some opportunity there and some decent prices from what I'm seeing, but has largely been overlooked and relatively decent sized lots. 3/4 of what's being bought are being detached properties. Land prices ranging from anywhere from $170 to $600 a square foot for land. 78% of units that are being built have 2 or 3 bedrooms. 20% difference in average rents from downtown to the inner suburbs, and roughly a 30% difference when we're looking at average rent per square foot between downtown and the inner suburbs as well. And the last thing I'll kind of touch on is this idea of what's going on in the rental market. One thing I'd probably say is I think people need to try to look beyond some of the headlines. A lot of the headlines have been extremely pessimistic in terms of rent. The fact is, average rents for condominiums, at least in the city of Toronto, have been flat since January, so rents have stabilized. I know a lot of the headlines are still talking about falling rents, but they've actually been flat. But we have to kind of look beyond the headlines too. I can't remember if I did it here foremost or I wrote a report on this, where I looked at sort of the change in rents by unit size, so comparing like micro condos to 1,200 square foot condos, and then a similar comparison against low-rise homes. And when you do that, you see that micro condos actually saw the most modest appreciation in rent growth over the previous 6 years, whereas larger units and actual low-rise homes saw a far more rapid increase in rents. And then if you actually kind of look at what has happened over the past 2 years, because that's where we've seen the biggest decline in rents since around August 2023, it is the micro units that have seen the biggest decline in rents, whereas larger condominiums and even low-rise family homes have seen very modest rents. Our office has rented houses, especially in the downtown core. The suburbs are a little bit different, but we've rented properties like low-rise homes, family-sized homes, 3 bedrooms, and have had bidding wars on them, even in a slow market. And again, I think a big part of that is the fact that we're not really building a lot of large, spacious, family-sized units. So while the sentiment is pessimistic, there's tons of rental inventory in the pipeline, it's not necessarily going to match up with kind of the demand is going to be over the next 3 or 4 years, both in terms of owner-occupied housing and if we look at even purpose-built rental housing. I don't think we're going to see tons of family-sized type housing. So I tend to be a little bit bullish in terms of sort of the rent growth in that segment.